Ever wondered what the Old Testament is all about? It's a massive book, I know. But what if I told you the entire epic story, from the very first page to the last, can be understood as one single overarching narrative? It's a story about God, humanity, and a plan to rescue the world. Let's break down this big story in the next 10 minutes. It all starts at the very beginning, with creation. Genesis chapter 1 paints this beautiful picture of God, speaking everything into existence out of nothing. The sun, the moon, the earth, the animals, and finally, humanity. Adam and Eve are created in God's image, placed in a perfect garden called Eden, and given a special mission to partner with God in ruling over and cultivating the world. They have a perfect relationship with their Creator and with each other. There is just one rule: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God warns them that this will lead to death. Well, a deceptive creature, a serpent, enters the scene and tempts them. It twists God's words and promises them they can be like God if they just take the fruit. And they do. This act of rebellion, this choice to define good and evil for themselves, shatters everything. Their relationship with God is broken. Shame, blame, and conflict enter their relationship with each other, and they are exiled from the garden, from God's immediate presence. This is what the Bible calls sin, and its consequences ripple outwards. We see this in the very next story, where their son Cain murders his brother Abel out of jealousy. The problem of human evil spirals, leading to violence and corruption that fills the earth. It gets so bad that God brings a great flood to cleanse the world, saving only Noah and his family in an ark. But even after the flood, humanity's heart problem remains. At the Tower of Babel, people unite in arrogance, trying to make a name for themselves and reach the heavens on their own terms. So God scatters them by confusing their languages. At this point, it seems like humanity is hopelessly lost, spiraling further and further away from God and His purpose. But God doesn't give up on His project. This is where the story takes a major turn. God chooses one man out of all the scattered peoples, a man named Abram, later called Abraham. God makes a series of incredible promises to him. He promises to give him a huge family, a land of their own, and most importantly, that through Abraham and his descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. This is God's rescue plan in motion. The story then follows Abraham's family, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel. Jacob has 12 sons, who become the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. But a famine forces Jacob's family to move to Egypt. At first, they are welcomed, but generations later, a new Pharaoh, who doesn't remember their history, enslaves them. For 400 years, the people of Israel suffer under brutal oppression. They cry out to God for help, and God hears them. He raises up a leader, Moses, to confront Pharaoh and lead his people to freedom. After a series of 10 plagues that demonstrate God's power over the gods of Egypt, Pharaoh finally lets them go. This dramatic escape, the Exodus, where God parts the Red Sea to save his people, becomes the defining event in Israel's history. It's their national birthday, a powerful symbol of God's salvation. After their rescue, God leads them to Mount Sinai. There, he makes a covenant, a formal agreement with the nation of Israel. He gives them the law, including the 10 Commandments. This law isn't a way to earn God's love, but a guide on how to live as his rescued people, how to love God and love their neighbors. It sets them apart as a holy nation, a kingdom of priests who are meant to represent God to the rest of the world. He also gives them instructions to build a tabernacle, a sacred tent where his glorious presence will dwell among them. The goal is to restore that Eden-like relationship, God living with his people. However, the journey to the promised land, the land of Canaan promised to Abraham, is not easy. The people repeatedly complain, rebel, and fail to trust God. Because of their disobedience, that first generation is not allowed to enter the land. It's the next generation, under the leadership of Joshua, that finally crosses the Jordan River and begins to conquer the land. But even then, their obedience is partial. The book of Judges describes a dark and chaotic period where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It's a cycle of sin, oppression by foreign nations, crying out to God, and God sending a judge or leader to rescue them, only for the cycle to start all over again. This chaos leads the people to demand a king, like all the other nations. They want a human ruler to lead them. God warns them this isn't his ideal plan, but he grants their request. The first king, Saul, starts well, but ends in failure due to his pride and disobedience. Then comes Israel's greatest king, David. He is described as a man after God's own heart. Under David, the kingdom is united, its enemies are subdued, and Jerusalem is established as the capital city. God makes another crucial promise, this time to David. He promises that David's throne will be established forever, and that one of his descendants will always rule. This is the promise of a future, eternal king. David's son, Solomon, builds a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, a permanent home for God's presence, replacing the portable tabernacle. The kingdom reaches its peak of wealth and influence. But Solomon, despite his wisdom, is led astray by his many foreign wives and begins to worship other gods, breaking the very first commandment. This leads to the kingdom's downfall. After Solomon's death, the nation splits in two. The northern kingdom, called Israel, and the southern kingdom, called Judah. What follows is a long, sad history of mostly corrupt kings who lead the people into idolatry and injustice. God sends a series of prophets-men like Elijah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah to call the kings and the people back to the covenant. They are like divine messengers, warning of the consequences of breaking the covenant, which is exile from the land. But they also speak of hope, of God's faithfulness, and of a future restoration. They talk about a new covenant God will make, not written on stone, but on people's hearts. They speak of a future king from David's line, a Messiah, which means anointed one, who will come to save them. The people don't listen. The warnings come true. First, the northern kingdom of Israel is conquered by the Assyrian Empire, and its people are scattered. Then, in 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire conquers the southern kingdom of Judah. They destroy Jerusalem and Solomon's beautiful temple, and carry the people away into exile in Babylon. This is a devastating moment. They've lost their land, their king, and their temple. It seems like all of God's promises have failed. But even in exile, God is at work. Prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel give the people hope that God has not abandoned them. They promise that God will bring them back to their land. And true to his word, decades later, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon, and the Persian king, Cyrus, allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem. They come back, and under leaders like Ezra and Nehemiah, they rebuild the temple and the city walls. However, things are not the same. The land is still under foreign rule. There is no king from David's line on the throne. And most importantly, God's glorious presence doesn't return to fill the new temple in the same way it filled the tabernacle and Solomon's temple. The prophets Malachi and Zechariah write during this period, highlighting the people's ongoing spiritual weakness, but also looking forward to a day when God himself will come to purify his people and fulfill all his promises. And that's where the Old Testament ends. It ends with a sense of anticipation, of waiting. The promises to Abraham, to David, the prophecies of a new covenant and a coming Messiah, they are all still hanging in the air, waiting for their ultimate fulfillment. The story has reached a cliffhanger. God's people are back in the land, but the core problems of sin, exile, and brokenness remain unsolved. The stage is set, and the world is waiting for a Savior, for the promised King who will finally bring God's blessing to all nations and complete the grand rescue operation that began all the way back in the garden. And that's the story that the New Testament picks up. Thanks for watching. If this helped you understand the big picture of the Old Testament, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that makes the Bible accessible and clear. See you in the next video.